Welcome to episode number 2 of Women Just Like You, a podcast full of advice for women in the middle of their careers, directly from women who are in the middle of theirs. I'm your host, Audrey the Career Woman, a fellow mid-career woman, and we are so lucky to have Kimberly Brown join us today. Kim spent 12 years in education as a teacher and principal at schools all across the country before making the decision to leave the field a few years ago. She learned how to ask for help from corporate mentors and joined networking organizations before moving into the legal operations space 2 years ago. I met Kim through a mentorship program during that time, and I've been so inspired by her ability to think critically about career changes that I just couldn't wait to bring her story to y'all. On the episode today, we'll hear about Kim's inspiration to pursue teaching as a career, how she learned to package her education skill set so it was applicable to the corporate world, what it was like being a transitioning teacher, and why she sought out a career in project and program management. Plus, we'll hear how an adult taught herself fractions. Alrighty, gals, let's buckle up and dive into it. All right, everyone, welcome Kim to our podcast. I'm so excited to talk with you, Kim. Thank you for joining Women Just Like You.
So happy to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me, Audrey.
Sure. So to kick us off, I ask all of my guests this. I would love to know, when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up and why?
So I wanted to be a teacher. As many kids that I knew, I really loved all of my teachers. I loved learning. And I felt like school was a place where I felt safe. I had role models and mentors. And I really admired a lot of my teachers. And so it gave me this desire to give back, and see how I could be that role model, be that mentor, and help students feel, cared and safe each day when they come to school.
That's so sweet. What age were you when you were like, I want to be a teacher?
I feel like it was like third grade. I had an amazing third grade teacher. She had this like super cool prize box. And I remember learning about fractions, and it was really fun. And I feel like I kind of developed my personality and like sense of self in third grade. And it was because of that like safe space and positive, rigorous learning environment that she created that kind of allowed me to open up, and really be myself.
So third grade Kim was all, I want to be a teacher. And so that's really, really cool, really inspiring. I hope you had a similar sort of box that you had when you were a teacher. So you're actually one of the few people I've talked to that when they were a kid, they wanted to be something. And when they grew up, they went and did it. So I would love to have you tell us a little bit about your career to date, which, started out in teaching.
Yeah. So, both of my parents were hard scientists, like biology, chemistry, immunology. And so I grew up in a very data-driven and research kind of driven, fact-driven environment. And there's definitely aspects of that in teaching. But it's really interesting to reflect back on when I, came home from school and I was like, I want to be a teacher. And my mom said something along the lines of, oh, well, if you're a teacher, you won't make enough money and you'll never get married. And looking back, my mom's like a relatively progressive person. So I'm kind of surprised, but I remember it so clearly because it was, when you're 10, you don't think about those things, but I was
Right.
like, oh, that seems really important. And I think, becoming a scientist for her was a way to kind of get herself out of the cycle of poverty. So it was something in her mind that was really important to her that she wanted to kind of pass on. And so I was on the path to go to graduate school to do research in psychology. And I really liked working in the lab when I was an undergrad, but what I liked more was going to volunteer every morning at like 7 a.m. at the elementary school down the street, in kind of like the outskirts of Washington, D.C. And when I was kind of trying to decide what to do my senior year, my mom gave me the advice. She said, there's lots of things to consider when you think about what you want to do after you graduate. But she was like, more than anything, you should do what makes you happy and what brings you joy, and fulfillment. And it was really easy for me to say, I'm not a morning person, but I will wake up at 6 o'clock and hop on the bus to go and support these students in learning how to read. And so that to me was a sign that that was the decision that I needed to make. So I did a program similar to Teach for America, or TFA, as some people know it, that was specific to the Washington, D.C. region. And it was called Capital Teaching Residence. I think it's still around, but it was a great program, and it launched me into, kind of the thing that appealed to me about it was it took a scientific approach. A lot of people hear about the science of reading now, but it took a scientific approach to education, which was right up my alley. So supporting students, measuring their growth, setting goals with them, and helping them be successful. And so I taught for about 7 years, kind of all across the country, in Camden, New Jersey, DC, Oakland. And then I got promoted to school leadership as an assistant principal, and then a principal most recently in Concord, California. And really enjoyed it. It was the hardest job. Being the principal was the hardest job I hope to ever have. Maybe that is ever out there. But it was super, super rewarding. And then interestingly enough, the pandemic hit at the same time that I became principal, which was really challenging. I'm not going to lie, as someone who is really gritty and stubborn and does not back down from challenges or things that are hard. But it was a lot. And at the same time, the school that I was working at was growing. And so we doubled in size from 300 students to about 750 students during the pandemic. And so it was just a really, it was a really challenging time for everyone, for all students and leaders across the world. And so it's hard for me, and almost like a little bit embarrassing for me to say that I honestly, I burnt out. I wasn't able to set boundaries in an effective way that allowed me to feel like I was doing my job and being as successful as I wanted to be for my students and my community, while being able to take care of myself. And so thinking about kind of long term, what my life was going to be like if I wanted to start a family, and just remain healthy overall, I needed to make a change. So kind of decided to step down from my role as principal. Was lucky enough to have an assistant principal who was amazing and ready to jump in right after me. And one of my mentors recommended operations. So I looked into operations and realized, oh, this is kind of what I do every day as a principal, just kind of in a different way, in a different space. So had the opportunity to join the legal operations team at Meta as a contractor, and had an amazing experience there, learned so much. And then most recently took an opportunity to be on the legal team in an operations role at Netflix. So that's where I am now. And it's been about 2 years since I've transitioned out of education, and I'm loving it.
That's so great to hear. And I think it's actually super relevant too, because there's a lot of teachers who, may be feeling burnt out. The pandemic, even today, several years later, has still made a huge impact on so many people, that just hearing the story of, you were able to go through the ranks of education from teacher to principal, and you were seeing that burnout and you were able to prioritize yourself. Like, I think that's so important for everyone to hear, that you got to prioritize your well-being, So I'm so glad to see you've been able to make the switch, and now you're 2 years out, and everyone else that's out there that is thinking of being a transitioning teacher, like Kim right here, we've got a story for you to give you all of the advice. So I'd love to kind of dive into some questions about like your time in education. It is a very female dominant field. What are some reflections that you can share with women who are teachers? And as you mentioned, you were able to get, you stepped into leadership within education and kind of became an assistant principal and then ultimately a principal. What reflections could you share with women who are wanting to pursue education management or follow in your footsteps and become a principal?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because if you were to ask me when I was in third grade and even when I graduated college, I never would have said that I was going to be a principal. I consider myself an ambivert and potentially lean introvert, and being an educator is a very extroverted role, and especially being a
Mhm.
principal. Um, and so I definitely questioned myself a lot. And so my recommendation is listen to your mentors or to people that you admire in the field, and really pay attention. If someone says, "Hey, like, that was so impactful, this thing that you shared with me or showed me or that I saw you do regarding your lesson," um, because that means that you're able to have an impact beyond your classroom, and that
Yeah.
means that you are you're not, it's not this I'm going to plan to, I'm going to take this course and then I'm going to be ready to be a principal. It's really about this authentic growth and this ability to master your craft and become an excellent teacher, and then be
Mhm.
able to have the space and the capacity to share that with others.
Mhm. So a little bit like being an expert player before going and being a coach.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think really pushing yourself to be outside of your comfort zone. I mean, I taught kindergarten for 4 years, and that will
Kudos
always
to you. 4, 5, 6-year-olds for 4 years. Good for you, Kim.
well, one thing, I'm not very tall, and so I had a rule that I was never going to teach a grade that where most of the students were taller than me. And so kindergarten felt safe.
Fair.
Um but I think, I was worried, I was nervous about teaching a different grade because it's so important to know the content really well to be able
Mhm.
to convey it at a kindergarten level to your students. But being a principal, I learned really quickly that and one, not regret, but thing that I wish I had done was push myself to try a different grade, try a different content each year. Because the basics and kind of the foundation of being a teacher and having, an excellent classroom culture and high academic standards is the same. But pushing yourself to learn how to teach fractions, for example, is a really unique thing, and throwing yourself into it is the best way to learn. So when
Mhm.
I was a principal, I had to cover and teach fifth grade math for most of the year while being principal. Um, and it was really challenging. And I wish, I had maybe pushed myself to try a different grade level or a different content as a
Mhm.
teacher, so that as a principal, I had that strong content knowledge going into it.
Mhm. What was it like teaching yourself fractions?
Lots of, I baked cookies and I cut them up. No, I'm just kidding. Um,
I
but
wouldn't be surprised.
yes. Um, it was hard. It's really challenging. This concept of like one and a
Mhm.
whole was the hardest thing to convey, because one piece of pizza is one, but it's really a fraction of a whole. And so there's a lot of I found that, like, having manipulatives or like things for kids to move around was really impactful, and then making that switch to pencil and paper was like a huge jump.
Mhm.
So just like, yeah, anticipating what students might think or might say was something really helpful that I did.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for diving into that. Maybe in the future we should get some pizza and we'll do a throwback to learning some fractions.
Absolutely.
So we touched on this a little bit when you mentioned, you moved out of education just a couple years ago. You got burnt out during the pandemic. A
Mhm.
lot of educators are out there thinking of leaving the profession. They feel burnt out. They've gone through similar experiences as you. Before making, such a big industry move, leaving education and going and doing something else, what advice would you give them or potential factors that they should think about before making that move?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it was an extremely hard decision, and something that I think about on a regular basis, and how my life would be different if I was still in education. And ultimately, it's really sad that was a decision that I was faced with, right? Like being able to prioritize my health and well-being and like financial stability, over something that I was really passionate, and really loved doing on a day-to-day basis. So just kind of like a shout out there, like it's a hard decision, and if anyone ever wants
Mhm.
to talk about it, like I'm open to, because it's not one to be taken lightly. And I think my biggest advice is have a plan, right?
Mhm.
As a former educator, um, uh, I made slightly above minimum wage in most places where I taught, but it was really important for me financially in order to keep living in the Bay Area, thanks to the outrageous rents. Um, it was really important for me to have a role or something lined up, before I made the move, right? So
Mhm.
I applied to a coffee shop. Like I worked at my local coffee shop just to make sure I had some sort of income, right? Um, and it also took much longer than expected. So I think, with the economy being how it is and how it was when I was deep into the job search where layoffs were happening, um, it's a tough time. So just be realistic with yourself, because putting yourself in a difficult situation financially makes it harder for you to kind of be your authentic and best self when you're looking for the best role, and you want to take a role that, is a good fit for you. And I think being vulnerable and putting yourself out there. In education, there's a lot of this mindset, at least in my experience, of self reliance. And you're really not always encouraged to ask for help because,
Yeah.
frankly, there isn't always help out there. There aren't always enough resources. And you got to figure it out on your own, which is a valuable skill to be able to do. But you have to kind of retrain yourself and not think of that need of needing help as a weakness, and reach out to your community, reach out to people who are outside of education, and
Mhm.
ask for help.
Mhm. I think that's so important for potentially transitioning teachers to hear that it's okay to ask for help. I know that educators and education as a whole, people are not paid enough, you know? Like we need to shout it to the world, like pay teachers, pay them what they're worth. But in the event that you are making a move, like have a plan because that is just so important to making sure that when you do make a move and you can ask for help, that you're asking from a position of strength and not a position of weakness. And that can help someone feel confident in that this is the right decision for me. Like I've got a plan. You can feel strength from that plan.
Definitely. Definitely.
So your first job out of education was a contract job with Meta's legal operations team. What was
Mm.
the transition like for you moving into a corporate role?
Um, it was really smooth, honestly.
Was it because you had a plan?
I had a plan, and also the landscape was just super different, right? I
Mhm.
came from a space that was extremely under-resourced to a space that where I had everything I needed to be successful and more. And so I was able to have a flexible working schedule, and location, right? I had the time to complete what was expected of me and take initiative and jump into projects that were interesting to me. And so I think the biggest challenge for me, honestly, was being alone, right? So I was fully remote, and working from home, and being around 750 students and teachers and faculty every single day, to being by myself, sitting at my dining room table all day, was like a huge transition.
Yeah.
And I think, being all of the skills that I had, the organizational skills, the planning skills, the operations, aspects of the job that I had when I was a principal translated really seamlessly to legal operations. So it was more of just kind of the overall experience of like, oh, I can wear sweatpants. Not that that was like the biggest thing, but it was like a really big deal to like have to dress professionally every single
Yeah.
day when going into school, to being able to like, make breakfast every morning and like have that space and time.
Mhm.
So yeah, it was a great transition, really smooth, but very different.
Yeah. I can't imagine that going from one of 700 to one of one. That's a big change.
Yes. Thankfully I
Big
have my
change.
dog and cat.
Yeah.
Yes,
Animals, they really, really help get you through things. What was that
absolutely.
experience like? What was that experience like being a woman at Meta? You hear about these FANG companies and all the different experiences that people have. Like, what was your experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it was definitely a transition. Education is a female dominant field. And the operations team at Meta was about half and half. So it was about 50-50 of people who identify as male versus female, but it was really positive. I I felt really respected. I felt appreciated. Um, and people were really open to hearing about my experience and my strengths and involving me in projects. So overall it was a really positive experience. I mean, I think, I had more, just like more instances of thinking about maybe questioning myself a little bit more around, oh, should I speak up, and should I, say this thing or idea that I have, and at times I was like, oh, am I thinking about that because it's a man leading this project or
Mhm.
not? And so there was some, kind of there were a couple of times where I maybe felt a little bit in my head, but I was able to recognize that and move through it and still feel confident in my skills and abilities, and push myself to still share what was on my mind and what I was thinking. And it was really well received.
That's so great, honestly. It's important to be able to be yourself and not feel like you have to filter anything. So I love that that was your experience. But it was a contract job, which
Hmm.
means there was a finite period of time that you were working there. And you and I had met during your contract
Hmm.
time at Meta, and you actually got an extension on it,
Hmm.
but it ultimately did come to an end. Can you tell us how you approached looking for that next job with this like impending, like not impending doom, but
Yeah.
this deadline that is like getting closer and closer and closer to you?
Yeah, it was tough, because it ultimately felt like it was out of my control. So, no matter how good I was at my job, or how successful I was, or how much of an asset I was to the company. So there's a law. I'm not sure if it's California or if it's federal, that contracts can only be renewed for up to 2 years, because the logic is, oh, if it's more than 2 years, then it should really be a full time job, which is
Fair.
interesting. Um, and I always knew that I needed a full-time role to ensure that I had the healthcare that I needed and the potential for, a reasonable amount of family leave for a future family if I wanted to have one. And unfortunately, legally, there aren't currently requirements to provide paid family leave for hourly or contracted roles, beyond the federal requirements of, I think it's 12 weeks of unpaid leave. And so that has a huge impact on people who are considering getting pregnant or raising a family. So that was definitely top of mind when I accepted the role. I mean, I think there were kind of two sides to this coin. One side was I was able to try something out that was really outside of my scope or comfort zone, knowing that my commitment was finite. So there
Mhm.
was some relief in that, right? If I didn't like it, I wasn't going to break anyone's heart. They
Yeah.
only expected me to be there till that date. Um, but then there was that uncertainty, right? And so really throughout my contract, I never stopped looking for a full-time role. Um, for that entire, year and a half that I was under contract, I was constantly networking, exploring opportunities. I went through a bunch of different rounds of interviews with different organizations, and kind of always had that, North Star of like, I know that this might not be where I am, where I'm going to be after my contract ends.
Mm-hmm. That's so good to hear too, especially because like it's an opportunity to take risks. It's a short period of time. Like this literally can't be a forever job because legally it can't be. So why not go ahead and take a risk and try something new? I love that. I never thought about that perspective for like a contract type job, but it's a really great perspective to have. And maybe if there's folks out there who are considering a contract role, like think of it from that perspective. You get this chance to try something new. And if you don't like it, that's fine. You can be done in a year.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely.
So you're obviously very skilled at project and program management. You've done this for most of your career, really, just in different settings, education and then tech, and now in the media entertainment space. And from the name, it can mean a lot of different things. Like operations is just such this big umbrella term, but it's super, super transferable. You've even proved that in the last couple of years, going from to a couple of different industries. So for folks that don't know, what do you do? What is a program or a project manager, and what do you love about it?
That's a great question. Anything and everything. So a lot of like Jill of all trades vibes in project and program management. So being open to, I'm like today I was on a call with some engineers and they were like, "Hey, can you take a look at this code?" And I was like, "I have no idea what this means, but like I will look at it, and if you tell me what to look for, I can figure it out." So being open and being kind of like fearless and brave in that space is something that's really crucial to being a programmer project manager. And so my current role is really a classic project management role. So I currently manage updates to our legal documents. So think terms of use, privacy statement, and coordinate all of the kind of back end engineering work and localization work that happens with translations. So making sure that whatever your IP address is, the right privacy statement shows up for you. And I would say my favorite part in all of my PM roles is really working cross-functionally. And I love this in education as well, just being able to work with people from different backgrounds, different expertise, and different strengths and weaknesses. And I think currently my role might appear pretty specific currently, but I learn so much every day working with people from all different teams across the business, the customer service team, working with lawyers, operations specialists. And I think that's my favorite part, just jumping on a call. You don't know who's going to be on there. You might see their cat walk across the screen, which is always fun. Um, and just, yeah, and just kind of hearing about their world and how your worlds are intertwined and connected.
Mm-hmm. That's such a good point too, because cross-functional work, like that is project management, right? If you have a project or even a program that you're managing like more long term, you're going to have people from so many different walks of life. Like I can't believe you had to look at code. Like that is just wild to me that here's Kim, former kindergarten teacher and principal being asked to look at some code at Netflix. Like that's not something you'd probably ever think would have been in the same sentence. And yet here we are.
That's so true. Like it's definitely not in the job description, but it kind of is, right? Like just being kind of open to jumping in and learning something, building the plane as you're flying it is a really great analogy, which is a lot of teaching
Yeah.
and being in education too.
Yeah. It sounds like education really gave you just such a great framework, for so many different things in life. And I know a lot of people who are in teaching, they will hear about something else that someone does in the corporate world and they're like, "Oh, I did that. I managed like, 37-year-olds. And like, I was able to get
Mhm.
everyone to like have a common goal. And you have people that have been in corporate for 20 years and can't do that. And it just goes to prove how transferable like education can be. And you're living proof here. So
Yes, yes, and you can't there you can't pay your students, so you just have to like win them over,
right.
which is a whole different world.
Yeah. Is there a like project or program you've worked on that's particularly memorable? I'm not sure about this coding situation, if this was going to be a very memorable one. It is for us right now because I still can't believe you were asked to look at some code. But is there something that is particularly memorable that really stands out to you?
Yes, yes, I'm sure this coding adventure will definitely be memorable, but I think the one that is really near and dear to my heart, when I was at Meta and I'm actually supporting a similar program, um, as I've joined Netflix, there's a summer internship program for law students that are from underrepresented groups. Um,
Okay.
and it's a really cool program. We partnered with non-top law schools, so really excellent law schools, but ones that are more accessible, more affordable to students who may be the first in their family to go to law school, or who are first generation to the United States. And I just met so many amazing students who worked so incredibly hard to get where they are, and had really a really clear passion for justice
Mhm.
in the legal space, and it was really exciting to support them, give them access to the amazing resources and networking opportunities that were at Meta, while they were in law school and thinking about what their life was going to be like in 5 to 10 years. So super rewarding, and just a really powerful program that I
Yeah,
managed.
that's so great. Did anyone start while you were in your role? Like, have you had anyone that was an intern that ended up getting full-time offers?
Not yet. No, and not
Fingers
while I was
crossed
there.
then.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were so many amazing students, and I know for a fact that a lot of them are still in contact with the teams that they work with at Meta. Um, and there's a real community, and I helped kind of build this alumni featured as the program had been around for 2 or 3 years. And so, kind of building this community so that, and I worked with a recruiting team as well to create a kind of a network of like, hey, these students already have experience at Meta. They understand the world and the space that we're in, and the legal work that we do. And so I'm really hopeful and excited to see that. But I'm sure it's going to happen.
Fingers crossed for everyone that's involved in that alumni network. And that's actually really cool. You were able to kind of create this continuing community group to help folks in their careers, like even after the program. And that actually leads me to another question I have for you, that you yourself, have gotten involved with a couple of like external professional groups, which I'm assuming have helped you with that transition from education into the more corporate 9 to 5. Like, would love to hear how those groups may have helped you so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're a prime example, right? Like we both did Phi Beta Kappa, and that's how we became connected,
Yep.
which was amazing to have you as a mentor in this space. But I think that there's a lot of groups, and I think, um, I just kind of did some browsing on LinkedIn and started building some connections, and people would say, "Oh, I'm a part of this group. Do you want to join?" And at first I was nervous. I was like, "Oh, well, I don't really know anything about the legal operations space. I'm just a new, I'm very new to this role." But people are it's very community oriented, and so I was able to build connections and learn about different industries and specialties within those industries really quickly, and people were so open to connect there.
Mhm.
I don't know if there was anyone that said no that I reached out to,
Wow.
which was really surprising to me,
Yeah.
because everyone is super busy, but everyone that I said, hey, this is my experience, these are my goals, this is what I'm trying to figure out right now. And I met with, tens of people over the 2-year period. And it really, I think the other thing was it gave me a chance going to those networking events. So I really pushed myself to go in person. So I tried
Mhm.
to do one networking call a week with someone that was virtual, and then one a month in person, which definitely kind of took that next step, especially after the
Yeah.
pandemic. And it gave me a chance to practice my story, describe my skill set in a transferable way that people outside of the education space would understand.
Yeah.
And it felt like I was learning a new language and kind of practicing it. But it was really important, and it was also fun. I met some people that now I consider really close friends
Mhm.
through these experiences.
So it sounds like asking for help, which is something you mentioned that a transitioning teacher needs to get comfortable doing. It looks like you
Mhm.
took your own advice there and asked for help and asked for coffee chats and asked for, connections that helped you. Even the process of asking, and as you mentioned, like tailoring your story for when it actually, not that building connections don't matter, but when you're in the job interview process and you've been practicing that with people who don't know you, and like you're tailoring that pitch to more people that don't know you, so that by the time the actual interview comes, the job offer comes, like you have had that practice. And it's all about getting comfortable asking for help, which might not seem so normal to someone
Mhm.
who's transitioning from education.
Exactly. Yeah. Practice makes perfect. And doing it in like a low risk, fun environment through networking communities and groups was a really powerful way.
Mhm. That's just so great. Everyone who might be a transitioning teacher, listen to that. Connect with people virtually, in person. You never know what those connections might bring you. It's brought me and Kim here today. So it works out. In addition to these professional groups, and when you were, thinking of leaving education, you've done some consulting work, some part-time gigs. You mentioned you worked at a coffee shop for a little bit to
Mhm.
help bridge that gap between education and a non-education role. What was some of the motivation for pursuing these jobs? I know we talked a little bit about that contract role at Meta. You had this deadline that was coming, and so you had this chance to take some risks. What were some of the motivations behind pursuing these types of jobs?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think that I had been in my kind of education bubble, which I'm realizing is not as much of a bubble as I thought it was initially, right? There's so
Mhm.
many transferable skills and spaces that are kind of housed in the role of being a principal. Um, and so it was really to put my toes in the water and figure out, what is this role like? What is this, do I want to do curriculum development? Do I want to work for an education nonprofit? And so like by volunteering in those roles or doing part-time work in those roles, I was able to experience them. And honestly, there wasn't anything that I was like able to say, oh, that's really definitely not for me. It was more kind of like a bridge between, okay, this is a role, especially like the curriculum development, professional development role. This is a role that is similar to education, but it's
Mhm.
definitely like a step removed. And so thinking about I think the biggest difference was time management, right? When you're in education,
Mhm.
your schedule is set for you.
Yeah.
And as a principal, I followed the school schedule. And so in these kind of more part-time roles, I had to stretch my skills around um, time and project management in a way that I hadn't done before. And so I think that those kind of in between roles that I had were really impactful and key to my success in the full time role that I have now.
Mhm.
And so being able to piece together and kind of prioritize on your own is something that is not always top of mind when you're in education.
Mhm. Mhm. That's so true. Figuring out what you don't like to do and what you do like to do. Some people are like, I just want to know what I want to do, but it is also valuable to figure out what you don't want to do. And you've
Mhm.
couple of different gigs that you had, showed you the light in both of those camps, kind of.
Definitely.
Yeah. So as we're getting close to the end of our conversation, we've talked about so many great topics about being a transitioning teacher, figuring out how to prioritize yourself and your health, learning a little bit about like what operations does and like what you love about your job. You just made a transition 2 years ago from education into this more traditional 9 to 5 type job. What do you imagine your career is going to look like in the next 5 or 10 years?
That's a great question. Well, taking my own advice, I'm remaining very open. I absolutely love the role that I have now and see lots of opportunities for growth, and to get creative and expand my scope, which is really, really exciting. Um, I think that I'm definitely the type of person that is always looking for the next challenge and, how can I be an asset to a team while growing my skills at the same time, which I think is an important thing to keep in mind. Um, Especially as a woman in the corporate space. Um, I really do enjoy training and development and people leadership, and so I see myself finding ways to lean into that, and keep that muscle strong in the future as opportunities arise to expand my scope and my role, either at Netflix or in other additional roles that I may take on.
So it sounds more about the type of work versus what kind of that ultimate end goal is, continuing to be challenged, but looking for a way to keep moving your skill set and growing your skill set a little bit at a time.
Definitely.
Yeah. Is that advice that you would give to women who are in the middle of their careers right now, or do you have any other advice for folks that might be in your shoes?
Yeah, definitely. I think stay open-minded, right? If you were to ask me 3 years ago, um, "Hey, you're gonna transition out of education. What do you envision yourself doing?" Being in legal operations is I didn't even know the field existed, right?
Mhm.
I wouldn't even have had those words in my vocabulary. So don't limit yourself. I started off my job search by looking for, a really specific niche perfect role. And that wasn't successful, right? Putting myself out there, reading what the job description was, or finding other people in my network or my community who had a similar role and saying, so what do you do day to day, right? Like, what do
Mhm.
you do when you open up your computer till when you close it? And finding kind of those connections and figuring out what roles aligned with what was most motivating and fulfilling to me was something that was super important. So don't, at first glance, if you see a title and you're like, I have no idea what that means, like, I've been there, but don't just skip over it. Like, go deeper and
Mhm.
and ask those questions to really put yourself in the shoes of someone who might have that role.
Mhm. And again, it goes back to your earlier point about asking for help, that if you don't know what a title means or what someone does, ask them.
Mhm.
You reached out to so many people on LinkedIn for networking and building connections, and every single person said yes to learning and opening up. So if that's a lesson that people can take away from our conversation, is like ask for help, put yourself out there. Like you never know what's going to come from it. So I love that. Stay open minded and uh, really just keep your eyes on the horizon and kind of see what slowly comes your way as you're moving forward.
Definitely. Definitely.
To wrap us up, Kim, I would love to hear an inspirational quote or a favorite saying that you have that we can leave our listeners with today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is a quote that my dad used to say when things were really good and when things were not really good, and kind of anywhere in between. So, he would always say, "This too shall pass." And to me, that means whatever stage you're in, whether you're at your dream job and it's amazing every single day, or you're looking for a new opportunity, or you're going through burnout or really struggling in your career, know that it's always temporary. And whatever stage that you're in, you're always learning something new about yourself and about the world. And really, the only constant is change. So
Mhm.
appreciate what you have, and know that change is coming.
Mhm. You've been through such a big change the last couple of years, and here you are thriving in a new role, hopefully taking care of yourself from a
Yep.
health perspective and keeping your personal life, priority and doing all the things to keep yourself moving and grooving all day, every day. So
Mhm.
thank you so much for this conversation. This was such a great chat that we had that I think pulled back the curtain for a lot of people who might be in education and are thinking, what else is out there? Like, am I just going to teach kindergartners for the rest of my life? And that is totally great. And
Mhm.
kudos to all of the people out there that make education, their 30, 40-year career. But if you're thinking of making that move, like Kim, you just shared a really incredible story of how the skill set you've developed in education has been able to build you a fulfilling career outside of it. So thank you so much, Kim, for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Wow, what a woman. In the show notes, you can find ways to connect with both me, Audrey the Career Woman, and Kim Brown, our guest today, and a link to sign up for exclusive insights into the making of future episodes and monthly career development recommendations. If you liked this episode, please share this conversation with the fabulous gal pals in your life. Because sometimes all us women need to hear is someone else's story to be able to think, if she can do it, so can I. Like, subscribe, rate, and follow so you don't miss a future episode of Women Just Like You. See you next Wednesday for a conversation with an award-winning woman who connected the dots from her first career in community organizing into her second career in talent program management. And with that, thanks for listening to this episode of Women Just Like You. See you on air soon, gals.